Well, hey, welcome to the X Podcast, wherever you're tuning in from, and we're so glad that you are with us. It is raining outside, if you can't hear it, for the first time in a few weeks. And
you're welcome.
No?
They won't hear it.
They won't hear it. Okay. But we're so glad that you're with us. Today's going to be a really, really fun day because there's a power at this table.
Yeah.
It's a more power. I hate already that I said the words that just came out of my mouth. It was really awful. But we got a special guest today. My cousin, Matt.
That's right.
Is here with us. How's it going, Matt?
It's going great, man. Apparently, I brought the rain and storms with me.
You did bring the rain with you.
I apologize. Apparently, you guys have had beautiful, immaculate weather for a couple of weeks.
We have.
And it ended literally the moment that I touched down.
And where did you come from?
So I came from Greenville, Spartanburg in South Carolina, flew up to Charlotte, and then came up here. I live in Anderson, right outside of Clemson, which I know in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, yeah. We liked Clemson this year.
This year you did.
Just not the previous couple of years. So,
right.
We got a lot of Moors at this table, and only two of them are related.
Right. Yeah. So if you're watching for the first time, there's no nepotism at play because me and Tim work together. He hired me, but we're not related. Yeah. But we're all three Moors at this table. But Matt is here with us for a few reasons. So it grew up together. He's only a month younger than me. Right. Has a twin brother, and so grew up together our whole lives. But Matt is somebody, one of the things we talk about on this podcast a lot is stepping into conversations and stepping into moments where you can stretch your mind. Yeah. You can always be growing in your thought process. And one of my favorite scriptures is that iron sharpens iron. And Matt is one of my favorite people to sharpen my mind against. About, once a month we'll FaceTime or Zoom or whatever. And I love picking his mind on topics. He's got a brilliant mind. Give a little bit of a quick resume just so you know who Matt is. And I'll tell you why I'm telling you this in just a moment. But has a bachelor's from Clemson. Again, don't hold that against him. A master's from Furman University and is currently in a PhD program through Liberty with a research focus on the intersection between education policy, technology, and adolescent growth and development. Wow. All fancy terms. Mouthful. Yeah, it is a mouthful. So basically, one of his primary, and I'll let you speak to this, one of his primary areas of expertise is that of digital media and its effect on us. Now, this is huge for a lot of reasons. Number one, because I have an assumption, if you're watching this, you're watching it on a TV, a computer, or a phone. And today I want to find out, how is this changing me? Yeah. How is this affecting me? What is this doing to my life? And we've talked a lot about the effects of media and social media on this podcast at times. But the cool part about today is it is not an exaggeration to say we have a measure of expertise at the table that is actually.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
No pressure whatsoever.
No pressure whatsoever.
You're the resident expert.
Right. We have a resident expert with us to talk about what he's discovering, what he's finding out. And we've mentioned this, but we've been in a series that's been so huge for us as a church in our faith context about emotional health. Yeah. And so another thing that I think is just really timely about these conversations is I think this could be another tool for us to understand how we leverage the devices in our lives is really going to have a direct impact on our mental health and our emotional health. And so, Matt, maybe just a quick way to kick it off is for you to just give an overview of your studies, what the overall umbrella is, and what is standing out to you.
Right. So, I guess the best way to start would be my career has essentially been a little bit of a sociological experiment. I started teaching. I did my student teaching through Clemson University in 2006. And in 2007, I started my teaching career in earnest, and that's an important year in terms of digital technology because that is when the first iPhone comes out.
Oh, wow. 07,
2007. Before that, and you make fun of me for flip phones and stuff, everybody essentially had a flip phone.
A Razor.
Or a Razor.
I had a Razor.
Which now
Did you have a BlackBerry?
I've owned a BlackBerry.
I think I was given one for work. I was in IT at the time, but I had a Razor.
If you wanted to have a smartphone, you had a BlackBerry.
Yep.
But what was in vogue
Before that was Palm Pilots.
Palm Pilots, right? But they were clunky. They weren't really smart.
Yep.
There was no real watching videos and stuff on there. I mean, it was cumbersome. 2007 changes things, but they're expensive devices. Not everybody can afford them. Data plans are crazy. And so, my first several years in the classroom are kids had cell phones. You had to occasionally get on to a kid. I started at the middle school level, so I would say less than half of my kids actually had a cell phone.
Right.
You had occasionally had to get on to kids for texting, but, I mean, it was few and far between. Right around 2010, 2011, the devices get cheaper. Cell phone carriers start to really heavily subsidize these devices. You get the introduction of, unlimited data plans. And then all of a sudden, they just explode on the scene. And so just, and again, I want to try to...
What year is this, 2012?
2010, 2011 is when I started to notice it. It was just much more of a fight with kids. And you were constantly competing for their attention. And we'll talk a lot about attention and focus. But I want to make sure that, when I talk to you about, digital media and social media and, distraction and focus, there's research behind it, and we'll go through that. But I'm also talking to you professionally through my own professional experience because, 2007 is essentially pre-iPhone all the way through today, which that's not that long, guys. That's 14 years, but they might as well be different planets. You ask anybody in the classroom what their experience is, young people, the way that they have changed. And again, that's not blaming young people. I want to make sure that I throw that out there. It is... I don't want this. We
gave him the phone.
I don't want this to be the podcast of kids these days. They're so blah blah blah. No. We did this. The adults in their lives did this. But
I remember just going back to that time frame. I was thinking back in 2010 or 11. I think that's where I remember feeling the pressure as a parent to give my oldest daughter an iPhone. I'm trying to think. She would have been in middle school, and I remember her, and I want to say it was probably around 2010, so it's probably right in line with that.
Yeah.
Maybe it might have been a little bit after this. It might have been 11 or 12. And I just remember her saying, Dad, everybody has one but me. Mm-hmm. I'm the only one. Yep. And so I think there's just an added collective pressure as parents to, when your kid – everybody's got one. I'm the only one that doesn't. And that's tough. That's tough to navigate and how to walk that with kids.
Right, and it's something that parents of adolescents already contend with pre-iPhone. But one of the problems with, and I don't want to, it's not just iPhones. I'm an Android guy, even though I would prefer not have any of them. But
it's been good seeing everybody today.
Good seeing you guys. No, but the problem with these devices in general is that they take whatever problem or whatever pressure is attendant with parenthood or adolescence, and the caliber of the bullet goes up way higher, again, so to speak. So, I mean, adolescence is already a tremendously high-pressure, awkward, difficult time. Yeah. And their kids are already struggling to figure out their place in the world, and dating and interpersonal relationships and their sense of self and identity, puberty. And the problem with a lot of these technologies is that when not used in a guided way, it really magnifies all those tremendously, and not just for the kids, for, like you said, parents as well. Yeah. I mean, what do you do as a parent when your kid is saying everybody has this? All the kids have a social media account, or they've got this device, and all my friends have a TikTok or whatever, and so there is tremendous pressure for you and for your child.
Was it Simon Sinek talks about the crucial years of adolescence in a student's life and in a human being's life, and then when you throw in the world, the Pandora's box of smart technology, with the temptations of, I mean, not just dangers of predators or pornography, but also dopamine addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
And identity confusion of where they're getting their value from. Talks about, he gives the analogy of unfettered access to social media and smartphones for an adolescent is much like saying, hey, if this adolescent thing ever gets you down,
Right.
here's the cabinet, here's the liquor cabinet.
Yeah.
Right.
Go make yourself feel better. And I'm just curious what you are observing, and maybe we can just back up just in general. What is screen addiction doing to us?
Mm-hmm.
What is it? How is it affecting the way the next generation thinks? What are you observing?
Right. So in the research or the literature, it's called PIU or IAD. And so PIU means problematic internet usage. IAD is internet addiction disorder. They're used somewhat interchangeably, and this is actually a place where definitionally there's some struggle, and the diagnostics are not great. And just to give you an understanding of how broad the data sets are, estimates for what percentage of American adolescents suffer from IAD or PIU, it varies from 3% to 38%, depending on what you look at.
So is this let me ask, is that like an official diagnosis now?
So
This ID or just a label?
actually, it depends what you mean by official. So IAD and PIU are in the academic literature, that is what they're called,
Okay.
and they roughly approximate the same thing.
Okay.
But to answer your question, no. I mean, so you can't go to the doctor and get diagnosed with I have internet addiction.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Gotcha.
Because typically, what the general psychological consensus is right now is that these are the internet dependency, for instance, is part and parcel of other psychopathologies, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
It's just a different vice,
right?
Correct. I mean, it's a different vice that you're addicted to, but it falls under the same other pathologies as mental disorders.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
I would disagree with that.
Sure.
I think that
You think it's unique?
I do think it's unique.
Yeah.
And just sort of harken back to what Russ was saying, the Simon Sinek quote about dopamine, I think that is relevant. And the way that our brains are wired, we were talking about this in the car on the way over here, the human brain is a miracle in a whole lot of ways, but there's no such thing as a free lunch. So there's no such thing as a free lunch, so to speak. Some of the same things that are inherent strengths in our software that our brain runs are also inherent disadvantages. And so the example I gave you, and I'm just using this to segue into the dopamine conversation, we have a series of cognitive biases that the software in our brains run. So why is it that when you stub your toe on a table, you get mad at the table? Why is it that when
I do always get mad at the table?
You do. You get mad at something.
I get mad at myself.
Right. Well, you're
I just
you're much
never
more
make any
mature.
mistakes.
Yeah,
than
oh, there
the
you
rest
go.
of us.
I'm like, you're an idiot. Why did you do that?
Why is it when you walk into a dark room and there's a coat hanger in the corner, it scares the mess out of you, and you just know for a split second that was a person there? It's called hyperactive agency detection. It's one of the many cognitive biases that we have. Well, why do we run that? We have that. That's not a defect.
Right.
That's useful.
Protection.
Because we immediately our brains want to detect personhood or agency in sounds and sights, because that is, in terms of survival, very, very useful. A similar problem is faced with information. What our brains crave is novel or new information. Not vetted information, not thorough information, balanced information. What our brains crave is novel or new information. So if you've got your phone in your pocket and you hear the notification tone go off or it vibrates, it's like an itch that you have to scratch.
Right.
All right. And when you scratch it, you get a hit of dopamine.
Yeah.
That's that sort of chemical interplay of reward and reinforcement. Because what your brain is trying to reinforce is, if there's a piece of new information to get, you should seek it out, you should acquire it, because that's, again, useful in terms of our survival. New information is good information, but we live in the 21st century. And there aren't a whole lot of, at least in the West, in America, there aren't a whole lot of true survival situations where you've got to have the latest information in order to make it, and so given social media and these devices, what ends up happening is we are living in a constant state of distraction. Okay, so to sort of answer your question, if you look at fMRI studies of students who have been diagnosed, and I say diagnosed not by your family doctor, right, but in these studies, they use these screening tools to they set a threshold, a diagnostic threshold for PIU or IAD. For those that approach IAD or meet the thresholds for IAD, and they do these fMRI studies on them, they find actual physical changes to their brain. So what they find is not
from the hits. Are we talking about the dopamine impact?
No, I'm talking about just their brains. If they have PIU or IAD, in other words, they are constantly pathologically needing
addicted to screens.
Addicted to screens. That's correct. What we find is that literally certain areas of the prefrontal cortex shrink. All right, especially the ones that have to do with locus of control and attention and focus and executive functioning, and then other areas that typically would not be associated with those tasks, they actually grow, and that's called recruitment. All right, your brain is saying this part isn't working well enough, we need to go recruit some power from another place. And so you have areas of the brain that get recruited that typically wouldn't be to do cognitive tasks that naturally would be a little bit easier. And so you've got that going on. They got to do all these kinds of really cool Stroop tasks with these kids. And Stroop tasks are where you have disparate stimuli. So, for instance, if you looked at the word red spelled out in blue ink, that's a Stroop task. And it's really interesting. Kids that have these problems, IAD, PIU, they really, really struggle to distinguish those kinds of tasks. Back tasks where you have to count back a certain number in a sequence. So if I were to give you a list of 5 animals, right, how many could you go back? If I asked you to go back 3 animals in that list, how many could you identify? And again, there's a really statistically significant difference between these kids that are on their devices all the time in a problematic way and those who aren't.
So let me just to recap what you're saying. I want to make sure to put it in kind of like just everyday language. You're saying that people, and again, the focus of these studies may be adolescents, but people who they are finding with PIU or IAD, that it is altering the brain to the point where the regular functions, whether it's the prefrontal cortex that handles, like you said, executive orders, logic, reason, all that kind of stuff, that portion of the brain is potentially being altered to where they will struggle with other basic functions that it should be able to do.
Is that what you're saying? That's absolutely correct.
So this addiction is not just what, I guess what I'm trying to say, it's not just a sociological thing. It's not just well, I just can't put my screen down. It's that there's a chemical impact that is affecting the neurological function of your brain. It is literally changing the pathology.
The physiology
of your brain
changes.
is altering. Neurons.
Is that irreversible?
Well, we don't know. To me, that is what is scary about it.
So I'm looking at
that's a big question,
a statistic that shows that tweens, teens, and screens, it says the average time kids spend watching online videos has doubled in 4 years. And this was 2019. This is before the pandemic. So basically what's happening with screen addiction is it's fundamentally changing our brains. It's fundamentally reducing our attention span. And yes.
Well, I want to throw out a caveat to that.
Yeah.
I just want to say, as a parent who's had 2 daughters, my oldest married, my youngest finishing her sophomore year in high school, and all fit into the same generation, but in many ways, such a velocity of technology that we talked about in that span has actually created almost, they're 5 years apart, but in a way 2 different childhoods. Mm-hmm. Okay. One of my observance, and so again, I don't know how this plays into the data, and I don't know how much the difference, I do believe there's a difference in the impact of this, is that my oldest daughter grew up without a phone. My youngest daughter did too, for the most part. She got it at a much younger age than my oldest daughter did. And so she spent far more time in front of a big screen than she did a little screen. Yeah. My youngest daughter rarely watched TV. Most of her TV watching was YouTube, or it was on a small screen. So as much as we're highlighting and we can capture the small screen time, I would say that I think that there's also a trade-off, that there's less of the big screen time. Now, I think we can make an argument that the small screen could be inherently more dangerous than the big screen, where at least it's programming, it's monitored by FCC, it's all these different things. So I want to throw that out to say, I know that's doubled, but I've seen a change in pattern. Right. So
just to respond to that, there's an excellent book by an MIT professor called Sherry Turkle, and I think as a father to daughters, you would be interested in it. Yeah. It's called Alone Together. She's excellent. So why we expect more from technology and less from each other. And she got the idea for the title of the book by watching her daughter and her friends go to hang out together.
But never.
They're in the same room, but they're all on their phones. And so I think that to address your point, what is particularly insidious about devices, and again, I've got a cell phone.
I just love the word insidious. I just love it.
I'm an English teacher.
Where you stand with it, which is great, and I love it.
I'm an English teacher by trade, but listen, I've got a cell phone in my pocket.
Yeah.
And we'll get to this in a minute. My biggest point of contention is parents need to parent. Mm-hmm. They need to stop abrogating their responsibility to monitor this, okay? Mm-hmm. Schools and parents and communities have to have open conversations about screen time, especially the aggregate number of hours. Yeah. So I don't want to just paint this as the boogeyman, okay? Right. But I will say that what is insidious about those devices is that it allows you to lie to yourself. Mm-hmm. When you are parked in front of a desktop, or you are, zoned out in front of a TV, right? Okay, you register that isolation. Mm-hmm. You really do.
Even if there's people in the room.
Even if there's people in the room, okay? But there's nothing, and how often do we see this? You're having a conversation with somebody, and your conversation goes like this,
Yeah. My wife says I do that a lot. So yeah.
And so
you're not listening to me.
That's a very unique element of those devices.
Well, isn't that unique? Because I feel like I heard that when I was watching TV. Mm-hmm. You're watching the game. You're not listening to me.
In fact, take us through.
It's just amplified.
We were having this conversation the other day. What is the difference? Because you made an interesting point the other day about any time that a generation approaches a new methodology, there's always pushback. Yeah. And there's always – so I never even thought about it this way, but when the oral tradition for hundreds and thousands of years switched to written tradition, they were the rebels. And there was this warning and foreboding about it, right?
Plato represents essentially the end of the oral tradition, okay? So up until that point, orality ruled the day. So how did anything get passed down? It got passed down because you memorized it, and then you found there was such a premium on good speakers, because if you heard a good speaker or a good storyteller, that's like reading a good book, right? Just the voice and the inflection and their accuracy in recalling it. And Plato bemoaned the advent of the written word because, and again, obviously paraphrasing here, but he's essentially saying, well, why would anybody have to remember anything? Why would you ever have to commit anything to memory if you could just record it somewhere and store it on a shelf, and then when you need it, you can pull it off the shelf. And so there is a certain extent, you're right, to which we view new technologies suspiciously and with a certain level of apprehension. But there is a distinct difference. Books tie into or require a type of thinking that actually runs counter to our vulnerabilities. So if you read a book, that requires deep, contemplative, linear thinking. It's really hard to read a book, at least for me. It's really hard to read a book when there's a bunch of people talking. Now, some people, they have honed that part of their brain so well that they can
coffee shop life.
They can just totally shut everything down. But that's a learned skill, by the way. Your average person can't do that. Because we are naturally distracted. We are wired for new information over current information or old information or vetted information. So we are wired to be distracted. And so reading actually runs counter to that. Whereas what we're talking about with devices, that plays in directly to our vulnerabilities. If you were going to, knowing what we know.
Are you talking about physiological vulnerabilities?
Physiological, the way the software our brain operates. So in terms of our desire for new information, our desire, if we want to get into the sociological aspect of it, our desire for validation from our peer group or our tribe. That's another element that we'll get into when we talk about polarization. If you are going to sit down in a lab and design a device that is going to leverage our psychological propensity towards distraction and our craving for novelty and our desire for in-group validation, you would get a cell phone. That's what you would get. Whereas if you were going to try to do that and somebody brought you a book, they would look at you like you were an idiot. Because a book is in many ways the opposite of those things. You more or less isolate yourself to read a book. You have to get into a frame of reference and a way of thinking that is totally foreign and unnatural in a lot of ways. So while I certainly grant yes, there's a certain level to which one generation views the upcoming generation with decadence, that's natural, or each new technology with suspicion, that's natural. I still would say that there is something unique and dangerous about particularly mobile devices, which are always on you and you're always connected.
I'm glad that you say it, because I feel like the old guy around here at times with the young ones, where I'm like, I've come to the conclusion that we'll say specifically that social media has far more negative effects than positive. That's again, we use it in ministry. It is a primary connection tool today in this culture today, and so we have to. But and I get pushback from some of the younger ones.
All right, I'm gonna.
Old, and it's like,
I already know what's coming.
Listen, just to see enough of this to go. I'm seeing that. So
listen, I'm sitting in Kevin's chair. I'm gonna play devil's advocate.
Oh, this is Kevin.
Because there's people, there's people watching that are probably thinking, and in fact, let me just say this: are there not amazing opportunities and benefits of our current technology? I mean, think about this. Right now, if danger were to hit, I could call somebody. Right now, if I need to know news, I can do it. Right now, instead of wasting my time driving down to an Amazon warehouse, I can order it. Right now, if I need to learn or educate myself,
Amazon might be
I can
the
do
greatest invention. 2 days.
If I was still quarantined, I can order food off this thing.
Yeah.
We right now have the ability. I have the ability, talk about socially, to connect with family across the country and across the world. I have the opportunity anytime, day or night, to text people. I have an opportunity. We have a social media team that as I'm laughing because I was telling you when it was so funny when Tucker, he said, if anybody's no longer fasting my ministry right now in January for the fast. And we are thankful for our social media team, because there are people that find community through social media. I have people that literally tell me, hey, when you guys push back on social media, kind of bothers me because they found community through it. They found help through it. Right now, one of the things that we believe in as a church is a lot of people use social media to get their information, to get their news. And so we leverage it, and we're proud of it. So are we being alarmist a little bit in the 911 bells that were ringing?
Right. So you're doing an excellent job of playing devil's advocate. I do want to push back real before I want to answer that. I want to answer that question.
Straw man.
Straw man.
Sorry, you're throwing it over here. We don't.
No, you are, but it's okay.
That is not a straw man.
I'm messing.
Ironclad.
So just as a for instance, Amazon has the greatest thing in the world. Has led to the death of thousands of American businesses.
I mean, I was going to bring that up.
And by the way, depending on who you listen to, treat many of their workers like garbage.
Jeff Bezos is a stand-up guy.
Do you really think that the perpetually connected news cycle has been good for America? You really think that?
Let's also
it has stretched our
let's put with the same thing. Let's put with the same thing the increase of anxiety. Okay, I just read a stat this past weekend that they said over the pandemic, 4 out of every 10 people claimed to deal with anxious episodes over this past year. Again, that's pandemic related, but also media. So I think you also, we cannot deny a lot of the great things that happen with there, but with all of those great things come unintended consequences, and I think anxiety is through the roof. Suicides, especially in younger age girls, have been more than doubled since 2012. If I recall a stat, you can probably speak to these stats better.
Okay.
So these are the unintended consequences that go with all the benefits.
Right. So I know you got some pushback, but 2 things that I'd love for you to speak to in layman terms in your pushback. In layman terms, how is not just looking at a screen, but let's be more specific. Screen addiction, an overage of screen addiction, an overage of social media use. Can we say it that way?
Sure.
How is that psychologically affecting people, especially the next generation? And one thing that I think may be powerful as far as self-awareness, because that's part of the point of this episode is self-awareness. Is you made an argument the other day that there's a deception in what we think we're using that at some point turns around and is actually using us.
Right. Yeah. So what I said is that we operate with a certain hubris in terms of technology.
What does that mean?
So what I mean is,
what do you think hubris means?
We pridefully think that we use technology. Technology doesn't use us. We change technology. Technology doesn't change us. But that's just not true.
Why?
Because we are, especially cognitively, this is the notion of neuroplasticity. We are cognitively what we repeatedly do. So if we seek out cognitive tasks which are challenging and which are active, then and require what I call deep or linear thinking. So there's delayed gratification. We have to maintain focus on one thing to complete the task. Then guess what? Neuroplasticity means we get better and more efficient at that type of cognitive task the more we do it. The opposite is also true, however. The more we think about the digital media world, Instagram, tweet, Snapchat, Twitter used to be 140 characters or less, and people thought it was this grand invention or advancement when they increased it. I don't know what they increased the character limit to. Everything about the digital ecosystem is based on efficiency. How short can something be? How quickly can something be done? And so, YouTube. I mean, try uploading a YouTube video that's longer than a certain amount. You have to have a certain kind of account to do it. The algorithm for YouTube searches prioritizes short videos over long videos. Everything about this ecosystem is about brevity. And so what does that do? If we are constantly in a state of engaging with short snippets, superficial treatments, then the science of neuroplasticity says that's what we become good at ingesting. The inverse is also true. We become
So in layman's terms, what's happening to us?
We are
rewiring
our brain. We are becoming really efficient at ingesting very small snippets of information and small snippets of data, and really, really bad at doing things which take long periods of focus and concentration. Okay, we have collectively, you want to put it in layman's term, we have environmental ADD.
Yeah.
As a society, if you ask somebody to do a task that requires sustained focus and attention, or heaven forbid, we don't even know when the task will be completed. Yeah. I'm going to give you a project, and it's going to take work. Here is your end goal, but I can't tell you when the due date is because it's up to you when it's done. That is a cognitive death sentence for a lot of people.
This is why I need nootropics.
And what,
okay, that's exactly right.
And I think, too, what we don't know is, again, this is so new, is the long-term societal impact, generational impact as we are rewired. Because your brain, your neuroplasticity means it is constantly changing and evolving.
Right.
And so what happens, right, is we put more energy into certain parts of our brain to do certain things and other parts don't. That we're rewiring our brains.
It's about efficiency.
Efficient. And so, right. I think the real question is, what is the cognitive impact 100 years from now?
Right.
We may not worry about that right now, but what does it look like, on this planet when it comes to our ability? So again, the alarmist type of ringing the bells would be like, we might be going backwards.
Yeah. Right. So apart from
de-evolution, no, we're going backwards. Right. So we reach the peak and it's downhill from here.
What you're telling me is we're becoming
could unfortunately,
or the machines are taking over because of the algorithm is going to own us.
So you're saying we're becoming more unfocused, lazier, and dumber.
That's. Yes.
Yes.
No.
Okay. So there was
hold on, let me just push back a little bit. Lazy is tough because lazy, I think, has to carry the connotation of intent. Mm-hmm. Okay, I wouldn't. Again, I've been in public education for 15 years. I would never talk about our young people as being lazy. Our young people are awesome, and they, by and large, have awesome intentions, and they want to be better. Mm-hmm. Again, not to be too harsh, but what the problem is not them. The problem is we collectively have sort of failed.
Well, I guess what I mean is, as a human race, it's creating a mental lethargy in us all.
That's a great way.
Good way, but he's good with words. I know.
He is.
That's why I let him host.
He is.
I'll tell you a secret. I knew what Hooper meant. So okay,
I had to learn
so there was this
from his book.
phenomenon on Netflix called The Social Dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
I told you about it, and in a very non-pretentious way, you grinned and found a way to tell me that this is what you have been trying to say for about probably 8 to 10 years, and you still haven't seen it.
I have not.
You've not seen the documentary. It's worth watching. It's worth watching. But you know what it's about. And so, again, not to overuse that term in layman's terms, but in layman's terms, because you have this issue, if it's an issue, and it sounds like the data and the research is saying it is an issue that's affecting us on a mental level, a sociological level.
I'd love to get into the emotional level
but
at
then
some point.
You combine that with the fact that this is not neutral. It's not neutral in what it does to us, but it's also not neutral in who is behind. There's a monetization in play. And so when it comes to the big tech companies, if you watch the documentary, to me, even though a lot of it may not be new, it's new on the scene for people, and they do a brilliant way, in my opinion, of giving a picture that's memorable. They have a group of people in this. It's like a laboratory. And their product, their patient, their experiment is on the screen, and it's a teenager. Yeah. And they are pushing buttons on, let's have this pop up here. Yeah. Let's have this ad pop up here. Let's let this text message come from this person now. Let's let this light up the phone. Let's let this. And it may be a bit dramatic, but the point that it's making is that this human being that thinks they're using technology has no idea
they're being used.
That they're being used. And so from a social level, I mean, we touched on it, even suicide rates, depression rates, anxiety rates. So in layman's terms, not only from your research, but also as a parent, but also as an assistant principal, what are you seeing on a social level, on a psychological level of what this is happening?
Yeah, so just to get into I haven't seen the documentary, but I understand it is fantastic. What people don't realize, if you're using social media isn't the product, you are the product. You need to understand that. It's not just about data, it's about the way that your feed, whatever platform you use, is manicured. I think I was telling you a little bit earlier that if you've ever been to Las Vegas, and you see people playing slot machines, and they've got that 1,000-yard stare, and they're just sort of drooling on the floor, and they just can't stop. That's because those slot machines have been programmed on what is called an intermittent variable reward schedule. Psychologists
They're using human psychology.
They're using human psychology because, if you stop and think about it, you want your players to win with enough frequency that they don't quit playing. They don't want to lose all their money and have zero, reward for it, because they'll walk away. You also don't want to reward them too much, because they'll take all your money, but also at some point they'll say, "Oh, look, I'm $1,000 up. I'm going to go get my wife something nice, and I'm going to call it a day." You want them to win with just enough frequency and accumulate just enough reward that they keep on playing. And that's how these casinos make money. And around 2013, 2014, these social media giants started to hire these psychologists away from Vegas casinos to help write the algorithms for these social media companies. And so that example that you gave, the way to visualize who the product is with social media, that's extremely accurate. When you have something pop up on your Facebook feed, the order in which it populated your feed, they release likes for your content in certain bursts, so they will hold back a number of likes because they have found that there's a bigger dopamine spike if you get a group of likes or notifications all at once instead of one at a time. Wow. So your feed is being manipulated to degrees that you're just not aware of whatsoever. You are being manipulated at a very basic psychological level in the same way that a gambling addict is being manipulated.
And what's that doing to people?
Okay. Well, I mean, the fact is that you use these things compulsively. Yeah. Think about Facebook. This is a really stupid, simple question. Why is it? They could have designed Facebook any way. Any old way. They could have been pages. Pagination used to be, digital pagination used to be this huge technological breakthrough. We can finally, mirror the experience of a book. Yep. They didn't do that. No. Scroll. Why is there an infinite scroll with these applications?
There's no
Seriously.
End. There's no end.
Because there's no end. Because the point is not to ever be done with them. The point is to use compulsively and never put it down. Yeah. And so what does that do to people? Well, I mean,
they waste their life.
Waste their life, but again, the very nature of the page, and again, I'm a huge notebook nerd, as you well know, to me, the supremacy of the paper page is that, there's several, and I won't bore you with all of it, but I can focus on just this. I can focus on one segment in particular, right? I don't feel this compulsion to have this endless flow of information. And so again, it ties into this constant state of distraction, of superficiality. I'm going to see just enough of what kills me are the people say, I get my news from Facebook, What they mean is they were scrolling their Facebook feed, and you can get like the 3 or 4 line blurb beneath the headline on your Facebook news articles. That's what they mean by getting there. They know just enough to be dangerous. So it ties into our increasing distraction, our increasing superficiality. We know a very, very, very little bit about a whole lot. Nicholas Carr has an awesome book. This was actually The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. This is, believe it or not, 10 years old at this point. People thought that he was an alarmist when he wrote this book. Yeah. He was right. Because the whole premise of the book is that technology is changing us. And he won runner-up for the Pulitzer, but he still had people that said, you're being an alarmist, you're catastrophizing, this is not that big of a deal, we'll adjust. But in my opinion, he's been right. He's been proven to be right.
What are you seeing as an assistant principal? What was the story you told us the other day about you got called in, just tragic call?
Well, I want to be as sensitive as I possibly can here. I would say that, we've got really two kinds of disciplinary referrals we deal with in a public school. And so some of them are automatically generated. So if you skipped a class or you were tardy a certain number of times, we have computer systems that pick that stuff up. If you skip a class, you were marked absent in just that class. So we can literally run a report. See, technology is not all that bad. No. We can just run a report and say, yeah, John Smith was absent from third period, but he was present everywhere else. And so, that's automatically generated. But discretionary referrals, these are teacher-generated referrals where or administratively generated referrals where it's behavior. It's true behavior. It's not kids being tardy. It's not kids being absent. It's like behavior. Someone was disrespectful, or they fought, or they threatened to fight, or whatever. I would say 75% of our discretionary behavioral referrals stem from social media disagreement, and particularly young women. It's.
I think they seem to be the most vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, and I would love to actually approach that topic because I think it's so important. I mean, if you're a parent at home and you have a pre-adolescent or adolescent young woman, you need to understand how dangerous social media platforms and, in general, digital media consumption can be.
You said you're not going to let your kids have a smartphone.
I've already said that. People laugh when I say that, but they don't know me, because I'm going to follow through on it. My kid's 13. My oldest is about to be 13, and he doesn't have one.
You don't think it would be more – you don't think it would help to show them how to handle it responsibly?
There is again, this is just my opinion because I want to make sure I'm careful here because you have children and you've let them have phones. Okay, so I want to make sure.
He's a bad parent.
That's basically what it sounds
exactly
like you're saying.
It is my opinion. I know my children.
My oldest, just as I have this, my oldest she got off social media.
Yeah.
So what's nice is that we've had enough conversations that she has seen the impact of it, whether it's wasting time with us. She'll get back on every once in a while, but has seen it and kind of at times makes a decision to go, I'm going to get off social media for a month or 2 months.
Good for her.
And it is. I think it's excellent. I've done that in my own life.
Sure.
And you have a flip phone.
I don't.
But I think you're making a great point that I think we need to be as parents really cautious.
I know my kids, right? And so I know my kids' vulnerability. Okay, so you know your kids, and so you know that. Look, if I just take them and you also know yourself. So if I take them and give them guidance, and I'm able to check their devices with fidelity, and teach them best practices and the risks that are attendant with these things, just having these kind of conversations that we're having right now, you know your kids. You know that they can respond to that. I love my kids very much. They are really smart, but they get it from their dad. I am very vulnerable. Russ was making light of me having a flip phone. I spent a year with a flip phone because I'm ADD. I am vulnerable to it, and I guess that's ironic given what I'm talking about here today. But I'm telling you, I find myself when I have a smartphone scrolling like a moron for hours and neglecting relationships and neglecting the work that I need to do. And my kids are very much like that. I know we have a no screen time at all rule during the week. Monday through Friday, my kids don't watch TV, play games, get on tablets, get on computers, anything during Monday through Friday.
But they're glad their dad's getting his doctorate degree.
I know.
I bet they're really glad. glad about that.
But here's but and I know that's funny, but it actually doesn't stem from that. It stems from my experience of I can see the difference when my kids get on a device. They go from these brilliant, creative thinkers to like just 2 hours on playing a PS4, and it's like Jackson.
Almost from
Jackson.
life to zombie.
Yeah,
Jackson. They're just total zombies.
Yeah.
And they get
That's
again.
fair.
They get it from me.
I think it's
Well, this hour has gotten away from us, and what's unfortunate is I feel like we could just sit here.
Can I just say this real quick because I want to talk about the girls real quick because this is crucial. If you look at rates of suicide, self-harm, suicidal ideation, anxiety and depression, and other related psychopathologies, the past 10 years, they have gone up for adolescent and pre-adolescent young women 189%.
Wow. Sounds about right.
This is mirrored in hospital admissions because what people did say, they countered, well, no, people are just more open now about their mental health, and that's a good thing. Well, no. Hospital admissions don't lie.
Yeah.
Okay? This is real. There is a health...
Those are your extreme cases, obviously.
Right.
But historical data would show us that that's a percentage.
And it has everything... correct.
Right.
It has everything to do with the way that people, boys and girls...
Isolation.
Well, it has to do with how they use the devices, and so and how conflict and aggression are different by gender. Boys' aggression tends to be physical in nature. They fight, they shake hands, and then they call it a day. And again, these are generalizations, but it's borne out in research. Girls' aggression is typically non-physical, but it's interpersonal. Okay, so they get very aggressive and they want to sabotage their social lives, and that is mirrored out in how the kids use their devices. Adolescent boys tend to use their devices, if we're going to talk about in deleterious ways or risky ways, the way that boys use the devices is pornography, which can be damaging, and video games, which can also be damaging if done too much. Girls don't do that. What girls do in terms of risk behavior on devices is social sabotage and digital interpersonal aggression. There is fear of missing out. There is talking about each other. If you can think about all the worst elements of social life of adolescence for young women, and then you multiply it by a factor of 20, that's what you get with young women online on these devices in the 21st century.
The worst case scenarios of many of that being suicide via cyberbullying.
Right.
The tragic cases we see of... Well,
I think this is fascinating. I agree with him. I mean, I think just to wrap up, so much said here. Thank you for just bringing. I feel like it's not just your perspective, but just the study, the professional environment in which you're a practitioner as an assistant principal, so you're dealing with this really at the ground level, also as a parent, and bringing these things. I think it's important for us to be aware. Be aware of what your kids are seeing. And one thing, this is such a bottomless well of conversation we can go into, because all we did was really talk on a subject of how this affects adolescents. We did not talk about how this affects us as adults. Yeah. And there is unintended consequences. So let's not just pretend they're the only ones at risk. Right. We're at risk. For the impact of how this doesn't. And because of that, I've made a decision beginning this year. I don't know how long I'll do it, but I'm fortunate enough, at least in ministry, to have social media team and people who manage my accounts and keep me up on whatever that. But I haven't been on social media since the beginning of the year. Yeah. And I did it for reasons that were more about I wanted margin in my mind and in my spirit. I wanted margin to be able to do the things that I really wanted to do, and found that I just gave myself far too much to mindless. This was when the first thing you do is pick up your phone and you're scrolling before you're even out of your bed. And you realize I felt like it was holding me back creatively and what I feel like I'm called to do. And so I've made a decision to do that. I haven't been on it since the beginning of this year.
And I just want to make a real quick point, because I don't want what I don't want is for parents whose kids have devices, which is essentially everybody, and whose kids have social media, which is most, to listen to this podcast and then click it off and say, I feel judged, I feel attacked.
Sure.
What I'm trying to communicate is just understand that there are risks. There are risks with driving. There are risks with adolescent life, but this is specifically dangerous. You need to have conversations with your kids. You need to set limits. I mean, I think that's parenthood 101 is limits. There are certain times you can't be on your phone. There's certain platforms I'm not going to let you use. I reserve the right to look at your phone.
Anytime.
Okay, just some common sense things to protect your children. And the problem is, what we find in the data is roughly 50% of parents never check their kids' phones, and they set no limits for use of their phones. So you've got kids falling asleep with phones in their beds, staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, getting into all manner of problems and situations they can't extricate themselves from. Just be an active parent. That's all I'm saying.
This has been amazing. I'll wrap up. I heard Donald Miller say this back on the dopamine thing. Is he said, and I'm curious, just by a nod of your head, if you agree with this. He said the way that we manage and reward ourselves with dopamine will actually signify the quality of our lives in the future. Talking about the way he talked about, if you wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is, in the way he talks about, Viktor Frankl. He has a lot of psychological work on creating a life of meaning, but he talks about the way that you construct your life and the way that you get dopamine. In other words, if you need an extreme example would be if you need 5 or 6 drinks a night to hit your dopamine reward. But even as small as, I'm trying to even think of something practical we could give us at the table. What does it look like? I know Simon Sinek says, don't charge your phone in your room. I notice the days that I wake up in the nights I wake up in the middle of the night and I have to look at my phone. I'm like, that doesn't feel right. And I'll just say, for me, one of the things, I don't have a social media team. Can we get that on payroll, social media team for me? Because I've not been on, I was telling you, I've not been on social media, I think, since December. And one of my main reasons was, same thing, I wanted margin. And not that again, I'm glad you said it. Look, anybody that's watching this, one of the main purposes of this episode is we knew it would purposefully be provocative, not for there to be condemnation that technology is evil or social media is evil, but just to raise awareness that we at least need to understand the risks so that we can manage our lives well. And I know for me, I just have seasons, and this has been a season of 3 or 4 months. There are some things I want to accomplish in life. There's some things of who I want to become in this season that I'm like, I know I'm going to need the mental and emotional margin to do it. And, perhaps one of the main risks just to consider, whatever your background is as you're watching this, is if we're not careful, this can replace life. And life is so short. Maybe even if you're in a faith context. I heard your favorite theologian, John Piper.
There you go. I like John Piper.
He one time said, if anything Twitter will serve on Judgment Day is that it wasn't for lack of time that our lack of prayer. And I was in Israel with my dad a few years ago, and I noticed halfway through the trip that I had quickly gone from seeing the sights and capturing the sights to this and missing what was around me. And I just the last couple of days said, you know what? I'm going to put this away. And what I did is, it's almost like an alcoholic has to make sure there's not any alcohol in the house. I had to leave it back at the hotel room. But and some of you are panicking even the thought of that. But I'm not exaggerating. The freedom I felt without the temptation, but to just look around, to engage in conversation. I heard somebody say something one time, and this may sound depressing, but he said, be careful that you, with your parent across the table, that one day if your head is in your phone, one day you're going to look up and the person across the table won't be there. And not to be too sobering as we end this, but I just want to say, maybe in an encouraging way, that let's leverage technology. Let's find a way together to leverage technology without technology leveraging us, because life is too beautiful to miss. And the people around our lives are too beautiful to not engage with. And we talk about Sabbath. One of the ways that one of the practices I've had over the last few years to help my emotional and mental margin. And on my days once a week where I take a day a week not to work, but to rest, to replug and unplug the Wi-Fi, one of the things I try to do several times during my Sabbath, there's places I love to go eat breakfast and lunch, and I will make myself leave my phone in the car. It may not sound like a big deal,
Right.
Yeah.
but I will make myself, at least for a good portion of that day, leave phone in the car to make my mind think, engage with people, and connect with life.
With quiet and
Space.
solitude. I mean,
There's something that we don't experience anymore that scientists actually say is good for us.
Boredom. Yep.
It's where ideation and innovation and our spirits are refreshed. And so I hope for everybody listening, no matter where you are, or if your parents cussing us right now, or hopefully you're if you're in Gen Z and you're wondering where does this all land, our hope is anything that these conversations just provoke you to think, provoke you to do your own research, and go on your own quest so that we can always become better, think higher, and love each other deeper and be more present in a world and in a life that's quickly passing. So thank you so much for tuning in to the X podcast. Matt, thank you so much for being a part of today. And as always, rate, review, subscribe, send us any questions, any feedback you have at podcast@thex.church. And until next time, you know what? We might even do a part 2 since you are already here with us. Maybe we'll get into some spicy,
might as well,
some spicy things. All right. We'll see you next time.